going to get started. I'm going to tell you about myself a little bit before we get going. My name is Cardinell. I'm an associate pastor of education. Way up north, if you know where Natchitoches is, where they do the Christmas festival every year, I'm about 30 minutes north of that. And in 12 years, I've never been to the Christmas festival. So, it is what it is. But that's where I am. I really enjoy it. We are actually a rural church. I tell folks we are out in the woods, and I mean it. We're out in the woods. It's 30 minutes to Walmart and an hour to Sam's. So that's where we are. And I love it. When I went there, they're like, Jay, you don't hunt, you don't fish, you're not going to stay here. I said, we'll see. And I've been there 12 years, so it's all good. So I thought we might have a small group. I could get you all to introduce yourselves to me, but that would take the entire time. So it is good to have y'all here this morning, and I hope you appreciate what the Lord has been teaching me the past few months. What I've been doing, I've been walking through the Gospels, and this is an ongoing project for me. I'm looking to see how Jesus did ministry. How does Jesus teach? How does Jesus serve? How does Jesus equip people for ministry? I've been kind of just walking through that project just for my own edification, also just for my teachers and helping them understand things as well. So we're going to be looking at that today, looking at how Jesus taught. But as we get started, if you didn't get a sheet, I can pass them around, or you can holler and we'll get them, maybe take one and pass it around. I'm not, Miss Catherine made me those, and there might not be too many more. I don't think she was expecting this many folks around. So as we get started, let me ask you a question. It's going to be trying a little interactive with our large group here. Let me ask you, why did Jesus come to earth? Tell me, why did Jesus come to earth?
To
seek and save lost. You know, I thought y'all might say that. I thought y'all might. Well, look, if Jesus came to seek and save the lost, why did Jesus teach so much? Why? Well, because as Dr. Lear told us, we got to know how to follow him, right? We got to be disciples. Well, I was thinking about Matthew chapter 18. Remember, Peter's there with Jesus, and Jesus tells him, he says, on this rock I'll do what? Build my church. Yeah, we're not going to talk about what the rock was. Was it Peter's faith? Was it Peter? All these things. I don't know what the rock was. I'm not a theologian. I'm an educator. But I do know this. Jesus said, I'll build my church. Jesus was a church builder. He built the church, and he builds our churches. And how does he do that? He does it by teaching people, teaching us how to follow him. And that's really what I want to talk about today, because God wants us to seek and save because he has saved. And so I want us to look today about what it means to teach like Jesus taught. A few months ago, well, about a year or so ago, we had a large building project at our church, large for us at least, and I was kind of in charge of that. And every week we met with subcontractors. We'd have we knew we were going to have this group on campus this week working. And so I'd meet with them. We talk about some problems, talk about what we need to do and this and that. And, we tore out the vestibule 3 times because the architect thought the contractor was wrong. The contractor thought the architect was wrong. So we're meeting, doing all this stuff. And I'd walk around, I'd talk to the guys on site, just get to know them. We'd take donuts to them and things like that, just to find out who they were and kind of introduce ourselves. And one thing I noticed was there's a lot of guys there, they have specialized tools. The electrician, he has the ohm reader. The plumber, he's got that little tool that cuts the copper, the copper tubing and all that. You got the welder's got his big welding machine. They all have specialized tools, and they use those for their specialized tasks. They are masters of their task, masters of their craft, and they've got specialized tools to help them do that. Jesus was a master teacher. And he had lots of specialized tools. And I've given you some of those on the second sheet there, I think I did. He's got lots of specialized tools. He used hyperbole. Man, Jesus, you talk about splinters, let's talk about logs in your eyes, okay? He would go big. He would use probing questions really to get into people's brains and help them understand themselves. He would use all these different specialized tools to teach. But something else I noticed when I was walking around on the instruction site? Besides all those specialized tools, you got things like hammers and squares and ladders. Everybody at some point is going to be using those. Now, they may be using it because they messed something up, so they got to bust out a wall to fix it, but everybody's going to use these basic tools all the time. And this morning, I want to talk about the basic tools that Jesus used in teaching. So we're going to dive into that and look at it today. And I had PowerPoint for us, but I couldn't figure things out because I'm too old for technology. But we're going to just kind of talk through some of this today. What is the most common method of teaching out there today? Lecture. What I'm doing right now, lecturing. You walk into a college classroom, you got lectures. I was at a large school one time and going to school there, and I walked in the room, and it was a big old lecture hall. It's just me, one guy, one man down there, one woman down there just talking to me for 45 minutes to an hour. It's a lecture. It's the most common tool in teaching today. Now, I've been told when I go to conferences like this, people tell me, it says, Jake, lectures are dead. Don't lecture, because telling ain't teaching. Telling ain't transforming. They'll tell me things like, if you just say it and don't involve them, they're not going to get it. Well, okay, I get it. But lecture is the most common form of teaching. So if we're going to have it in our churches, let's do it right. Let's find a good way to lecture. Stephen Brookfield said this. Now, Stephen Brookfield's an educator. If you go to secular school and do education, I read him there. When I was at seminary and doing education, I read him there. He said this about lectures. He said, many people have said it's dead. He said, yet for having expired so frequently, its corpse displays a remarkable liveliness. So I want us to bring that corpse to life today. If we're going to have lectures, let's do it right. So where do you hear a lecture every week? In your classroom, in church? What do you say over sermons? A sermon is a lecture. Dr. Luter just gave us a lecture. Now, was that boring? It was not boring. You can do lectures and do them right. The Holy Spirit works through that lecture that comes from that pulpit every Sunday morning. Sometimes those sermons, those lectures, those talks, as some young churches call it, we're going to have our talk this Sunday morning. And, they have all these different words, but some of them are engaging. Some of them involve yelling. Some of them involve a little bit of spitting. Some of them involve a little bit of jumping. Some of them involve all these things. And some of them have a nice big pulpit like we had out there this morning. If you come to my church and I'm preaching, you're going to have a little bit of lectern up here and a stool. That's how the way I do it. And so you have all these different types of sermons, all these different types of lectures, but the Holy Spirit works through them. I want us to talk just a little bit second about the way Jesus lectured, the way he talked to people. There's about 50 different times in Scripture where Jesus has a discourse with someone. Some of those are outright lectures. Some of those are more like conversations. But the thing about Jesus' lectures, and that should be true about ours, they're varied in content. We don't always talk about the same thing. If you're teaching your Sunday school teachers or if you're teaching in Sunday school, you want to vary what you talk about. Don't talk about the same thing all the time. If you're using Explore the Bible like these guys are, that helps you do that. It's varied in length. Some lectures are long and some lectures are short. It doesn't matter. They can both be effective. Jesus' lecture is varied in location. You don't always have to teach in a classroom. You can teach outside, you can teach in a gym, you can teach in a pulpit. Jesus' lectures were combined with other methods. And we're going to talk about that in a second. Jesus' lectures were combined with other ways of teaching. He asked questions. He used object lessons. He used different word pictures to help do that. Jesus' lectures moved from the known to the unknown. Jesus talked about manna, and then he talked about the bread of life. He moves from something they understand to something that they are learning about. And so that's something important for us to understand as well as when we lecture. His lectures appealed to various aspects of the soul. A lot of times we just teach for the intellect. Let's just get that knowledge out there. Sometimes we teach and we want to touch their emotions. Emotions aren't bad. Emotions help us change the way we act and change the way we function in the world. And also we want to preach and lecture in our classes, teach in a way that affects people's will. What do you want to do? Because if we don't want it, we ain't going to do it. I say that all the time. People are like, why didn't so-and-so do that? Why didn't so-and-so come to church? Why didn't so-and-so volunteer? I say, people do what they want to do. That's just the truth. So all these things are true about Jesus' lectures. And one thing about his lectures too, they were individualized. Sometimes Jesus talked to a certain person differently than he talked to another person. He talked to Nicodemus differently than he talked to the rich young ruler. Because they were different people. They had different needs. They had different issues they were dealing with. So we individualize our lectures. When I teach the senior adult men's class, maybe say somebody's out one week and I've got to go teach the senior adult men's class, and I go in there, I'm going to teach that differently than I teach my college kids. It's just different. So we individualize our lectures if that's what we're doing. And also we want to put illustrations in our lectures. Jesus did that. He talked about the ubiquitous spiders. Oh, that's a scary one. Ubiquitous sparrows. He talked about the splinters. He talked about all these different things to help spice up his lectures. So I want us to sharpen our tools just a little bit here. And I want us to think about a couple ways that we can maybe make our lectures a little more engaging. First off, if you're going to lecture, now you don't have to, but if you're going to lecture, you need to know what you're talking about. okay? We don't want to just get up and ramble. You know, one scholar said this: a lecture is not just a patchwork quilt of random ideas and choice quotations hastily thrown together and casually delivered. If it's worth lecturing, it's worth learning about. So if you're going to stand in front of your class, which is fine, and you're going to lecture to them, you need to know what you're talking about. Because guess what? I've learned this when you teach senior adults. They are not afraid to go, "Excuse me, young man." I ain't so young anymore, but they'll tell me how it is. Or they'll be nice. They'll say, "Well, Brother Jay, I know when I was reading." So, but they'll tell you. So know what you're talking about. Here's what I want you to do. Now, this is a large group, and we're going to do this, though, because this is just where we're going to do it. I want you to turn to somebody next to you, and I want you to ask yourselves this question, okay? How can we incorporate other teaching methods, other ways of teaching into our lectures, okay? How can we incorporate other ways of teaching in our lectures? So I'm going to give you 3 minutes. What are some other things you can do along with your lectures in your teaching? So turn to somebody next to you and ask that question, and then come back and we'll talk about it. All right, so do me a favor. Somebody give me some other teaching method that you can throw into a lecture to make it more engaging or more thought-provoking. What is something you came up with? Discussion?
Video.
Okay. Video? What? Visuals? Visual aid? Illustrations? Okay, what's that? Music? Oh, music. I'm not a musical person, but I have a class every week they sing a song together. And so anything else that I missed? Testimonials? Stories?
Make it fun.
Make it fun? I don't care what you do, just make it fun. You know, don't be boring, right? Okay, so there are all kinds of ways that we can put different methods into our lecture because, you know, we're just comfortable lecturing sometimes, but we can throw these different things in, like, what did I just do? I put together a little group work, and y'all did it. Now y'all were engaged in that learning process together. Also, we want to focus and refocus people's attention. People have a short attention span, and we need to refocus their attention. Now, it's harder to do in this situation, but a lot of times I'll write on the board. Do I need to write that on the board? No. But if I stand up, like I try and, since I'm in a small classroom, I try and sit because it's just weird, awkward to stand in front of people sometimes. But if I stand up and walk over here and write something on the board, every eye in the room goes, "Oh, what's he doing? What's he doing?" You know, or like if I've got this poster, I'll sit here and I'll just kind of, up here, you know, see over Babylon's over here, and they'll be like, "What's he pointing at?" They refocus attention. How many times in a sermon have you checked out? And you are checked out, you're writing your list, whatever, you're thinking about this or that, and all of a sudden the preacher goes, "The other day I was at Walmart." You're like, "Whoa, what did the preacher do at Walmart?" What dumb thing did the preacher do at Walmart, right? When they tell a story, you check up. So if you've got a story you can tell, they'll check up, they'll listen to you. And so focus and refocus their attention constantly. And use ample illustrations, both verbal and visual. Again, if you've got the opportunity to do PowerPoint, do it. I've got a Sunday school, high school or junior high Sunday school teacher. He does PowerPoint every week just because it engages them. They look at it. You know, I always have posters on the wall whether I need them or not. I poke holes in the wall. It's okay. You know, so you know, use visual things. So Jesus was a lecturer. He did do lectures, but Jesus also taught in other ways. Jesus also taught by using questions. Jesus asked at least 300 questions at different times in the Gospels. And he asked questions not because they were necessary to teach. You don't have to ask a question. I can just give you all the information. You don't have to ask him, but he didn't do it just to have discussion because he wanted discussion. Jesus asked questions because some truths that can be conveyed in discourse or lecture or declaration are more effectively communicated by means of questions, calling for a response, either mental or verbal. So when we ask people questions, it causes what we call in education cognitive dissonance. That's a big old fancy education concept. In other words, we cause people to understand they don't know something. And if they don't know something, we're going to help them find the answer to what they don't know. That's why we ask questions. And if they can begin the process of finding the answers themselves, guess what? They're going to remember that answer better than the answer you gave them. And so we have to help, by asking questions, we're helping people engage in the learning process themselves. And I gave you on that second sheet a whole bunch of different ways Jesus used questions, and we're not going to go through all those, but there's a bunch of ways that he used questions to help people understand what he's trying to teach them. But I want to consider a question that he asked, and I lost my Bible because I lost my lectern. In Matthew chapter 11, Jesus asked some questions. Let's see if I can find the book of Matthew. Matthew chapter 11. So we start off Matthew chapter 11, and Jesus had been talking to the disciples, and it says in verse 2, "Now when John heard in prison about the deeds of Christ, he sent words to the disciples and said to them, 'Are you the one who came, or shall we seek?'" Am I in the right? Yeah, okay, that's what I thought. Okay, so he says, "Are you the one who has come, or shall we look for another?" Jesus answered him, "Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive the sight, and the lame walk. Lepers are cleansed. The deaf hear. The dead are raised. And the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me." Okay, so these workers of John, these followers of John, came to Jesus and asked him, "Are you who we're looking for?" And then it left. They left. They went away. So Jesus began to speak to the crowds concerning John. So Jesus is going to teach about John now. But how does he do it? Does he get up and say, "Here's who John is"? No. Look back at verse 7. He looks out at this group of people. They've already heard the conversation about John. Looks out at them and says, "What did you go out in the wilderness to see? What'd you go looking for? What'd you go? You left Jerusalem. It's nice and cleanish in Jerusalem, and you went out in the wilderness. What'd you go to see?" Sorry, my eyes. He said, "A reed shaken by the wind." Did you go out in the wilderness, look at some reeds? No, Jesus, we didn't do that. Well, what did you go out there to see then? A man dressed in soft clothes? Well, no, we didn't go looking for that either. Well, let's see. "Behold, those who wear soft clothes are kings and houses." Now he begins teaching them about John. So he begins the process of saying, what did you go looking for? You think about this, folks. What did you go looking for? Who'd you go seeing? So he began asking questions to get them thinking about what they don't really know they don't know. And then he begins to teach them what they need to know about John. So he just begins the process by causing them to understand that they don't know everything that he needs to teach them. So questions, though. Questions are hard. They are hard to write. They're hard to ask. If you've ever read the Sunday school literature, you're like, what does that question mean? Who came up with that question? Sorry, Lifeway folks, and just, it is what it is. Sometimes you look and you just don't know what's going on. Questions are hard. Sometimes they're too simplistic. Sometimes they're just too airy and esoteric. It's like, whoa, that's a deep thought question. I encounter this every week. I'll write a lesson plan for my Sunday school teachers. Sorry, we still call it Sunday school. And still, we write a lesson plan for them every week. They've got the Explore the Bible Leader Guide. They've got the Explore the Bible Commentary, the Personal Study Guide. They've got the maps. They've got everything. But I'm writing a lesson for myself. So I said, well, let me just write a lesson for them. So I write a 5 to 6 page lesson plan that just kind of lays out everything for them. I go pull out a few other commentaries, some simple commentaries, and kind of look through those, and I write it out. I say, if you do this, especially to my younger teachers, I give them the lesson plan. I say, if you will start by just going through this lesson plan, say what I have you say, ask the question, have you ask the question. If you'll do that, you can teach a class. Because I put a lot of different ways of teaching in there for them. But one day, last fall, I teach college students, as I said, and we had a large group of college students one Sunday because it was a special Sunday. So I had one of my other students teach with me. And so we kind of had a good time doing that. And so we decided to do it from then on out. And so I would do the theology part. I'd do all the Bible knowledge part of the lesson. And she would ask the questions and kind of lead the discussions and things like that. Really helpful. And one Sunday, she had the lesson plan there in front of her. And she goes, "Brother Jay put this question on here. And I have no idea what he means by this question. And I don't know how to ask it." Asking questions are hard. That really shook me because sometimes I can come to you after class and be like, "Hey, I used your lesson plan and I didn't understand that question." But she is a college student, so she did it. So questions are hard. They're either too simple or they're just too weird. And so let's talk about questions for a second. When considering questions, we need to consider the scope of the question. First, we have narrow questions. Narrow questions have 1 or 2 possible answers. How old was Methuselah? That's an easy. It's just an answer. It's just one question. It's narrow. How did Peter respond when Jesus did whatever, X, Y, and Z? Those are simple questions. They can be useful, though. You can use them to break up a lecture. You've been talking for 10 minutes, so you just say, how old was Methuselah? And so it gets somebody else to talking. Or how did Peter respond? He just breaks things up a little bit. I kind of use them to drive the lesson forward sometimes. If it's a kind of just a narrative passage, maybe you're studying the Old Testament or something, it's just a story, and instead of me just reading this text and then retelling the story, I kind of say, now, what did verse 7 say? Who did what in verse 8? And it's very simple walking, but it's them kind of just walking through the text. And that's one way to use narrow questions, and they're easy in that sense. But narrow questions can be difficult too, because you don't want to just say, John, how old was Methuselah? Because if John doesn't know, guess what? John is suddenly like, I don't know, and I'm embarrassed. And if I haven't been to church in a while and whatever, then John may not come back. So what I do with when I ask a question like that, I'll be like, y'all look back up in verse 3 and tell me how many lepers were at the gate. Or I'll say, look back at chapter 27, verse 5, and how old was Methuselah? So I'm telling them where to find the answer when I ask the question. That's just kind of a way to use narrow questions to drive the lesson forward without causing a problem. But the second type of questions, the ones we use more often, those are broad questions. What's a broad question? If a narrow question it has one or two answers, what's a broad question? How many answers might it have? All kinds of questions, all kinds of answers, all kinds of stuff going on with that. You might ask, how do you think Mary felt when she was anointing Jesus' feet? That's a broad question, because your life experience is different than my life experience, and so understanding how Mary felt might be different for all of us. Broad questions. How might salvation affect the everyday life of a person? Again, your life experience is different than mine, so you're going to answer that question differently. But they allow people to dig into their own experiences and their own feelings. What's the benefit of using broad questions? And what are some drawbacks? What's the benefit of using broad questions like that? Discussion. Okay, a lot more involvement. More participation. More perspectives. Connection. You connect people together. You building relationships. Y'all, I'm a 43-year-old man. My experience is different than all y'all. And so it helps us dig into that. What's the challenge with it? Rabbit trails. Yep. Open up a can of worms. I guarantee you somebody is going to get off on politics. I don't care what you're talking about. Politics. I went out visiting a few weeks ago. We still do home visits where I'm from, and it's very successful. And I was sitting on somebody's porch the other day, and I don't know how we got off onto it. We were talking about politics, and I was like, how do we get here, and how do I get out of this? Broad questions, they bring in all these different perspectives, but they also can be challenging. And you've got to learn the nice way of cutting somebody off. Oh, thank you, brother. Or something. I don't know. Find a way to do it. But somebody, though, they may say, I don't care how somebody feels about a passage. I don't care what somebody thinks about a passage, because there's only one way to think about a passage. I care how people feel about a passage, because how they feel shows me what's going on in their life and helps me understand their emotions and helps me help them feel in a way that's more healthy and more positive. I care how somebody thinks about a passage, because if they think wrongly about a passage, if they got some heresy going on accident, I can help them think rightly about a passage, okay? So that's why I care. And if somebody says something that's like totally off the wall, well, I can walk them in a nice way toward a more proper way of understanding the situation. And if you don't ask those questions, you'll never know that. I mean, your whole group may think that some crazy thing. I don't know. And you can help them. If you don't ever ask, you'll never know. So broad questions help us move in that directions. So here's a few thoughts on crafting questions. Sharpen our skills on this a little bit. If you want specific information, ask specific questions. Okay, that's the narrow questions. Questions can be used in the service of your lesson goal. I challenge you. If you're using Explore the Bible or some other type of lesson plan, look at that aim at the beginning of each lesson, what your goal, what you're headed for, because that will keep you on track. I've been in some Sunday school classes where we just walked through the lesson. I'm like, what was the point of that? I mean, we hit every verse, but I never saw the point. But if you look at that aim or that goal and then use your questions to guide you throughout the lesson, to constantly get you back there and keep you from getting off track and lost. But also we use questions to express a concept and then ask learners for an example. So for example, you might say, Paul once wrote, the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. What kind of person in the Bible who lives like that might exemplify what Paul says? So you've expressed who it is, and you could just say, Paul said blah, blah, and let me give you some examples. Or you can say, Paul said this, now y'all give me some examples. And you begin to walk them through. And somebody's going to say the person that you had in mind, okay? The person you kind of want to talk about, your example that you had already. Somebody's going to say it. Well, after you get 3 or 4 examples, you say, well, let's come back and let's talk about that one person. I think they can show us what's really going on here. So you can use your questions to help guide them toward what you want to talk about, but also, again, it involves them, it helps them understand the concept a little better. Ask hypothetical questions to stimulate discussion. Ask hypothetical questions to stimulate discussion. So, you're like, if you went to Walmart and you saw somebody dressed like John the Baptist in our day and age, what would you do, or how would you react? If John the Baptist walked in our church, how would we react? Ask those type of questions and kind of get people going and thinking and thinking about stuff. So one thing we got to do though, if you're going to ask questions, you're going to have to address a mute group. You're going to have to address some people who don't really want to talk. If you're out in the hallway, they will talk your ears off for 35 minutes about LSU football. But they come in the classroom and it's like somebody hit the mute button on the remote and they can't talk. You ask a question, just ask what day is it? And they're like, I don't know what day it is. It's Sunday, okay? So so we got to help people, help our mute groups. So one way of doing this is group work, like I did earlier with y'all. How can group work help group members answer questions and foster discussion? How can group work in a large group lecture setting like this? By the way, if your Sunday school class is this big, I encourage you, find some leaders and raise them up and send them out with half your group. But if you're in a large group like this and you want to foster discussion, how can group work help you do that? What are some ways? Or why? How does it do that?
Get some talking.
Get some talking to one-on-one. Again, somebody over here said the youth are the worst, teenagers are the worst. Same with college students. Again, they talk all the time, but you get in a classroom, they don't want to talk. And so I guess they're embarrassed or whatever, don't want to speak in front of somebody else. Men's groups are a lot like this as well. If you've got like serious adult men's groups, they're just like, tell me, don't want to talk about it. Well, group work, what that does, it helps those who don't want to talk in a large group express their information to someone else who will talk. So if I don't like group work. I really don't. I'm such an introvert and I don't want to talk to people and things like that. And so, but if I'm sitting next to somebody who I'm kind of, if I'm sitting with them, I'm probably friends with them or at least comfortable with them, I'll tell them what I think about the teacher's question. I'll talk to them about that. And then when it comes time to say, the teacher says, okay, y'all tell me what you thought, they might not say it, but their friend will. Their friend will help them express or want to talk. So it's a way to get people to talk about things and think about things and really and participate when they really wouldn't. Pre-enlist someone to answer the question. Now, that sounds weird to do. Pre-enlist someone to answer the question. If you've got a mute group, I'm going to ask this question and nobody's going to answer it. Well, pre-enlist someone to answer it. I have a lady in my church, saw her the other day. She had her little a t-shirt on. It's her birthday t-shirt, so it's 80 is great. So that tells you how old she is, right? So she's 80. Granny's 80. And she came to me last week, and she was in our welcome center or something during the day, and she goes, Brother Jay, I've been in church for 80 years, and I've never heard of those people before. Now, who are those people? If you're going to explore the Bible, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, who did we talk about? The Rechabites. And she was like, I don't know who those people are. So if you're teaching a class, you could have someone do a little mini lecture on the Rechabites. You don't want to call it that. That sounds terrible. But say, hey, call up John on Monday and say, John, can you look at the sheet of paper that was in our leader guide and tell us about the Rechabites next week? Just give 5 or 6 minutes about the Rechabites. Or if you're going to talk about something that's kind of emotional and kind of like kind of get people thinking about their own life, you might have somebody who's had some experiences in life that you haven't, and they can answer that question. Don't call them out in class and say, Susie, tell us about that time that such and such happened in your life. But you may call her on Tuesday and say, Susie, I know you and your husband went through this a few months ago, a few years ago. You think you can talk about that in our class this week? Now, she may not want to do it, but it's an opportunity for her to share firsthand experience. You pre-enlist her to talk about, to answer a question that she might have wanted to ask, but really didn't know the best way to do it. So third, we can better craft questions to fit personality and life stage. What time do we get out of here? I don't have my 11? Okay, good. Better craft questions to fit personality and life stage of your group. So for example, if you are teaching men, you might not ask a lot of feelings questions, okay? Or you might say, guys, I don't want you to answer this aloud, but I want you to think about this question, okay? Now, in a women's class, that might not be an issue. Just have your box of tissue ready, okay? So, but also too, like I said, I teach college students. And there might be a question in the book that says, how did you discipline your child when he was 5 years old? Well, none of my students have kids that are 5 years old. So I might say, how did your mom and daddy discipline you when you were 5 years old? So you want to make sure you ask the right questions to the right groups and that type of thing. And so those are just one way to liven up your questioning activities. So let's look at one last lesson. And I was going to show you a video on this, but you'll know it. I just got to imagine there's a bus stop. It's a movie. You've seen it. Came out in the 90s. There's a bus stop there. It's a bench and trees behind it. And there's a man sitting on it with a box in his lap. Nurse walks up beside him. What does he say? Mama always said life is like what? A box of chocolates. You never know. That's right. What is that box of chocolates? It's an object lesson. It's an object lesson. Y'all, object lessons are a powerful tool to use in our classroom. They are a great teaching method. I just want you to think about one. We won't look it up. One time Jesus used an object lesson. He was sitting there and he said, bring that kid over here. Let's see anybody's like this kid. Okay? Object lesson. Jesus one day was, there's a chapter, I love this chapter. I think it's Mark chapter 4. If you go look at Mark chapter 3, chapter 4, that area, Jesus is teaching through parables. And then he gets to a point where he's teaching the disciples how to use parables. So then I imagine Jesus one day, he's sitting out there, either he's sitting under a mustard tree, or they're sitting there looking at one, or maybe he's got some seeds in his hand. He says to the guys, guys, we've been talking about parables, and I've been teaching you how to use parables. He said, if you had to come up with a parable today about the kingdom of God, what would you come up with? Now, we don't have an answer. Mark doesn't give us any answers. I don't know if they would, if they had some answers back and forth or whatnot. And Jesus said, the answer to that question is, kingdom of God's like a mustard seed. Now, that's one thing, but if he's sitting under a tree or if he has something in his hand, those are object lessons. These are pictures that people can use, things that people can, tangible things they can latch onto. A few months ago, I can't remember what the lesson was on, but I saw one of my senior adult men, he came into class with a rubber ducky. And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm doing the idea you put in the lesson plan. I brought the little thing with the water and the duck. I don't even know what it was about. I can't remember. But this is a men's class. He's got a rubber ducky. He's talked about something. And I doubt those men forgot that week. They probably latched on. Probably the only thing they remembered was the rubber ducky. 2 weeks ago, I was preaching. Our preacher was in Mexico, and I was preaching. And I was up on stage, and I got out a yellow hat. I talked about this yellow hat. Then I got a blue hat. Talked about the blue hat. Now, any of y'all do disaster relief? Who's in charge in disaster relief? The blue hat or the yellow hat? The blue hat. Blue hat's in charge. And I was talking about Korah's rebellion. And I said, Aaron and Moses were wearing blue hats, and Korah's wearing a yellow hat. And he comes up and he wants to be in charge. They probably didn't remember anything else about that lesson, the fact that I had a hat on stage, okay? So that's all they remember. But it was a way to engage them with that idea of leadership and fellowship. So there's a lot going on with lesson plan, with object lessons. But I want us to think about a couple ways to use object lessons in our lessons, in our teaching. Let me just ask you this question before I get into it. Where are some places you can find object lessons? Where are some places you can find object lessons? Online? Does anybody still get a newspaper? Anybody still get a newspaper? Do they even make those things anymore? Your Google News feed, object lessons. I'm a podcast person. I'm not sure if y'all are. All the time. I downloaded 4 or 5 last night and listened on the way home today. So I just kind of glean these things from everyday life. From when you're in Walmart, you see something happen. Kind of keep an eye out. You have to have eyes to see, ears to hear and eyes to see, right? What I would encourage you to do is on Monday or Sunday, just glance over your lesson. Just know what's coming your way. We're going to talk about fellowship. We're going to talk about what it means to do X, Y, and Z. And then throughout the week, just keep an eye open for those things. Might be examples that you can use in class. I would encourage you also to keep a note. Keep a note, whether it's on your phone, if you want a notebook, just kind of keep a tally of interesting spiritual things you see. I heard about this years ago. The old-time preachers, they would have a file in their filing cabinet full of newspaper clippings and cutouts. so they could pull out sometime. I heard about the guy the other day. He just keeps a running tally of different themes. If he sees things or has experiences, he'll put that down under that theme, mercy or whatever. He'll have these things to do. You have to keep an idea, keep an eye out and a pad out so that you can remember these things. You might not use it for 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 months. I don't know. But it might be something that you can latch back onto. And the last thing I would tell you is don't be scared. That was what I put. Don't be scared. Don't be scared. You might say, they're going to think this is dumb if I bring this into class. Y'all, a few weeks ago, we were studying, this was quite a long time ago, we were studying the Feast of Booths in Sunday school. I don't know if y'all remember this. If you're studying Explore the Bible, we did the Feast of Booths. And I encouraged my teachers, I said, why don't you come to your class and set up a tent in your class. Just set up a tent in your class and use that to talk about the Feast of Booths. Or go outside. Set up a tent outside, a big, like you take to a tailgate thing, and just teach out there. Those are ways to do object lessons. They can be tangible objects. That might be the T that you're missing there on your page. They can be locations, all these things that you can use as object lessons. So Jesus used specialized tools, yes, but Jesus lectured all the time. Jesus asked questions all the time. And Jesus used object lessons all the time. And we can use those things. We don't have to be fancy. We don't have to be, quote, cutting edge and all this stuff. You can use these basic tools to teach your classes. Now, if you want to be fancy, awesome, I love it. If you want to get all crazy and use some of these creative teaching tools and all this stuff, great, I love it. But you don't have to. You can be basic and still teach God's Word. So that's what I want to bring to y'all today because that's what Jesus has for us. We still have about 4 or 5 minutes. Does anybody have any thoughts, questions? Or as our preacher says, snide remarks? Anything? All right, well, we'll tell you this. If you need me for anything, this is my name, email address. It's long. And so if you need me anything, I can send you this. I can send you the PowerPoint. Whatever you need, it's there. Besides that, it's going to take 10 minutes for us to get out of this room.